The woman whom I've always called my mother is not my mother, and I'm not saying this because she's recently abandoned me, or abandoned my sick father while still being married to him. My father was the only child of his widowed mother, and things were pretty rough for them. My father did his best to go through college, and he became a stock trader. Things began falling into place for him, and he started thinking about settling down. He met a lady, my biological mother, who got pregnant for him while they were engaged, and the plan was to get married once I was born, but she had complications during childbirth and passed away. My grandmother had to take care of me while my father worked. We all lived in the same house, though. My father, he had a hard time getting over my mother, and it took about 10 years till he began to think about marriage again. At this time, we had moved into a better house, me, my dad, and Grandma. Dad soon informed Grandma that he was seeing somebody, and though Grandma had been pushing him to get married, she told my father to be careful while making his choices because most ladies would give up anything just to be the wife of a man as successful as him. My father spoke well about his lover, Elizabeth, but he did not want his grandma to just take his word. He wanted her to meet with his lover, as he convinced both Grandma and I would love her, so he brought her over to the house. I can never forget the first time Aunt Elizabeth was brought to the house. She was super cool when viewed from the perspective of my grandma and I, but Grandma looked for a homely lady who was not materialistic and equally had a job of her own, while I needed a friend and a companion who was not as old as Grandma. Grandma was someone who could easily see right through people, but Elizabeth, or Aunt Lizzie as I called her, fooled every one of us. She gradually just worked her way up into our heads and hearts, and it was only a matter of time before we began pleading with her to stay over each time she came to visit. Even Grandma began asking my father when he was going to take things to the next level with Aunt Lizzie. Well, my father soon called me one day and asked what my opinion was about having Aunt Lizzie come to stay with us permanently, and I was thrilled at the idea. That was when he broke the news to Grandma and me that they were both engaged. Everybody was happy. The prospect of having a full family, father, mother, and siblings was something I had desired for a while. Once they were engaged, Aunt Lizzie asked that I start calling her Mom. I was 10 years old at the time, and I knew she was not my mother, but she had won my heart, and I easily adjusted to calling her Mom. They had a very nice wedding, and both went on a 2-week honeymoon. Grandma and I could not wait for the latest couple in town to come back so our home could be the paradise we envisioned, but it would turn out that the picture that we had in our heads would never materialize. My parents came back on a Sunday night, and both Grandma and I had made sure that they settled in a very well manner, as we knew that they both would leave for the next morning. Grandma and I were both awakened very early the next morning by the tone of my mother's voice. Just so you would understand how loud her voice was, just know that I'm a deep sleeper. This was the first time that we would be hearing Elizabeth shout, but the more disturbing fact was, why would a woman who just got married 2 weeks ago be shouting at her husband on the morning after they returned from their honeymoon? Well, Grandma immediately rushed to their room and asked what happened, but my mother just rudely greeted her and began dressing up for work. Grandma asked that my father wait for his wife to leave for work as she wanted to talk to him about what happened. They discussed with Grandma asking my father what he had done to his wife, but my father was dismissive. He told Grandma that it was a little misunderstanding, but they would get over it before the day was over. Grandma was not pleased with the response which my father had given, and she decided to talk to his wife herself. We were both in the parlor when my father's wife came home, and her response to our greeting was cold. I could tell that it had something to do with her argument with my father in the morning. Grandma stopped her in the tracks while she wanted to go into her room and tried to find out what the issue was. Elizabeth was initially dismissive, just like my dad, but she soon got irritated as Grandma refused, letting her brush the question under the carpet. Elizabeth finally busted out and told Grandma that she was the problem. We were shocked at the response and the tune of my father's wife. She went inside the room and locked herself in there. My grandmother began thinking about the possible way that she could have offended her daughter-in-law, but she could not come up with any. She did nothing else but wait for my father to return so she could just press the answer out of him. My father got home and still tried evading the question by claiming that the issue was no big deal, but Grandma told him that the statement that his wife had made, well, which showed that it was a serious matter. It was then that my father opened up to Grandma by telling her that his wife was demanding she leaves the house to get a place of her own. Grandma asked what she had done wrong to make Elizabeth want her to leave, but my father said nothing. According to him, Elizabeth simply said it was wrong for the mother-in-law to live with the couple as they needed privacy. My father, however, noted that he was dealing with the issue and Grandma had nothing to worry about. Grandma was not happy upon learning that her presence in the house that she lived in, before Elizabeth even came into the picture, was the bedrock of the issue. She did not want the matter to escalate beyond what it was already, so she spoke with Elizabeth herself. She tried making her see, though she lived in the house with us, she recognized that Elizabeth was my father's wife, and so she had more authority. She promised to not get into her way, but Elizabeth refused. She told Grandma that she had parents too, but neither of them was living with us because it's not an ideal thing, and she told Grandma to simply leave. It was clear to Grandma that we had all made a mistake by accepting Elizabeth into our lives. She discreetly met with Dad and told him her mind. Dad was not willing to accept what Grandma was saying, and it was not a surprise. Who would want to hear that he made a mistake in the decision of the choice of life partner just barely 3 weeks into a fresh marriage? Dad told Grandma to just go give Elizabeth some time as she would come around, but Grandma maintained her ground that Elizabeth would only grow worse. She suggested that my dad divorce her to salvage the situation before it gets out of hand. The divorce suggestion did not go down well with Dad. He immediately rebuked his mother because he knew what the legal implications would be. Grandma knew his thought, but she was one to always speak her mind no matter who was involved, and so she told my father losing half of his property to Elizabeth in divorce was nothing compared to how miserable my father would be if he remained with her. My father refused and insisted my grandma gave Elizabeth some time. Upon seeing the issue was a lost cause, Grandma asked my dad to rent her a new apartment so she could move out within a week. Dad felt bad, just like me, that his mother wanted to leave his house, but he preferred that to divorce. He got her a house in 2 days, and Grandma did not waste time moving out. I remember the weekend when Grandma left the house. My dad wanted to drive her to her place, but she insisted on catching an Uber. I cried as she was moving out, but Elizabeth consoled me by telling me that she was more than enough for me. What a consolation! If only Dad could see the dark future that awaited him, he would have heeded his mom's advice. No, Dad received a call a few weeks after Grandma left the house. She was having health complications and had been rushed to the hospital. I believe the forceful separation from me and Dad had contributed to her problems, to be honest. The doctors on duty were able to stabilize her, and after she would go on to spend a couple days at the hospital before getting discharged. Dad thought it best to have her move back in with us so she could be better taken care of, and our presence could cheer her up. He spoke with his wife about the issue, but she was having a different opinion. Elizabeth asked my dad to ignore his mother, as the sickness was just a ploy to get his attention and probably use emotional blackmail to come back to live with us. She claimed it was typical of parents to use blackmail on children. Well, my father listened to her and he still regrets it to date, and my grandmother was discharged from the hospital, but we got the sad news a week later. She passed away. Well, we lost her to cardiac arrest. Grandmother's death hit my father like a ton of bricks, and it showed even in his health. Elizabeth should have been pushing father into pushing his mother away, did not seem affected at all. She told my dad not to linger on the morning the death of his mother, and she's lived a full life, and there's no doubt by his actions that he proved his love to her while she was alive. Her words simply wounded Dad. Grandma did not live a full life. She died emotionally when she moved out of the house, and Elizabeth was to blame for this. I mean, come on. The funeral was over, and Elizabeth met my dad to discuss the childlessness issue. She said that Granny had died and they still had a family to discuss. My father ignored her insensitivity to Grandma's demise and the fact that she had just been buried. He reminded her that they had been trying ever since they got married and there's no cause for alarm, as they've been married for barely a year. Elizabeth seemed impatient. She compelled my father and they went for various testings at various specialists, and the test results proved that they were both okay, and the doctors all advised them to just keep trying. Elizabeth soon met my dad and suggested that they try surrogacy or an adoption. My father noted that the surrogacy plan was expensive, and it was too soon to be considering adoption. He tried appealing to his wife to give it some time before they would try some other options. Elizabeth became frustrated, and it showed in the way she related to everybody in the house. She soon poured out her frustration on me one weekend when I asked her for something. We still had sympathizers who could not come to Grandma's funeral to sympathize with us, and my dad was in the parlor with him when Elizabeth pounced on me. I can't remember what the issue was, but I needed something from the kitchen where Elizabeth was, and I asked her about it. I called her Mom, as that was how she asked me to refer her. I'd been developing a kind of resentment towards her ever since she acted insensitively towards the death of Grandmother. Elizabeth flared up at the mention of Mom from me, and she began saying all manners of terrible things to me. I mean, all things, part of which was that she was not my mother. I put some distance between us while she was raging, because that was the right thing to do. I mean, she had a fork in her hand. The noise distracted my father and the sympathizers, and my father came to see what the issue was. Elizabeth immediately turned the table against him, calling him insensitive. She claimed he did not care about her happiness as a woman, which, according to her, came from greeting her child. My father did not want to be embarrassed in the presence of the sympathizers, so he promised his wife that they would settle the issue later, but Elizabeth was mad. My father had to discharge the sympathizers, and that was when the major drama began. So, he raised his voice for the first time on her, and she was shocked. She had always thought my dad was somebody to be taken for a ride. He warned her to never embarrass him like that again. They slept in separate rooms that night, and my father did not talk to her before leaving for work the next morning. Elizabeth met my father that evening and told him she wanted a divorce. The talk of divorce had my father seeking peace, and so in a bid to pacify her, he asked her what she wanted. Elizabeth knew that she had my father where she wanted him, so she began to make her demands. Elizabeth told him to strike my name from the will, until they had a child and decided how this property would be allocated when he died. Besides the property aspect, which proved that Elizabeth had her sights on my father's wealth, she insisted that they started the adoption process immediately. My father accepted the terms that his wife had laid down, and the adoption process was kick-started. They had gone halfway through the whole thing when Dad had an accident one day, suffered an injury to his spine, which greatly affected his mobility. So, Dad had to temporarily halt his job and employed the services of certain individuals to attend to my father at home. Things began downhill financially for my father. I've just gotten into high school, but I had to suspend my schooling because I could not leave my dad at home, not the way that I saw him, and I did not want to add to his financial stress either. Elizabeth was still working, but she began coming home very late. She came in late, left early, and even moved into another room in the house. It was like she was avoiding her husband. Things got to the point where Dad could no longer sustain the service of the employees because of all the financial constraints, so he had to lay some of them off. He discussed this with Elizabeth and asked if she could support him financially so he could retain the people attending to him. But she refused. Yeah, I forgot to mention the part that no dime from the money she made was used by the family. My dad then noted that most of the employees would need to go and suggested Elizabeth tried coming home early so she could help attend him, and Elizabeth asked that I take care of my father alone so she could not put her job in jeopardy for Dad. Well, her response got me pondering about a lot of things, and I was sure Dad did some thinking too. If Granny was alive, living with us, she would not need to be told before attending to my father, but that was not possible because of his wife who had her cut off. These were exactly what Grandma had warned Dad about when she suggested, while divorcing Elizabeth. He was not just suffering mobility issues, but he equally lost some peace in his mind. Elizabeth's attitude just grew worse, to the point that, well, she went to work one day and returned the next morning. My father inquired to know what had happened, but she said it was all work-related. Her reply was lame, but she didn't care. It was clear that she's begun cheating because she was probably giving someone attention that she was not giving to her husband. The major blow came 3 days after she had slept outside of the house. She came home from work and informed my father she's getting a divorce. Well, you would not call it a sham marriage, would you? Elizabeth was not kidding. She had begun the divorce proceedings, and it dawned on my father that he had been stupid on all fronts. The divorce that he was fighting so hard to avoid was now unavoidable, and it was coming at a time when he was down physically and financially. Now, the marriage would end, and whatever he was left with of his property would be split in two. My father has been trying to reason with Elizabeth ever since, but she's moved out of the house to avoid seeing the both of us. They're not officially divorced yet, though I think my father's trying his best to salvage the situation, because if Elizabeth should divorce him, then he would be left with almost nothing. Update number 1. The only way my father thought to save his marriage, which in my own opinion had ended long ago, was to reach out to Elizabeth's family. Ever since he started experiencing troubles in his marriage, he had not involved anyone, because he did not want people delving into his private matters, but this situation was already out of hand. People were talking. A few people had informed my father in the last few days that they'd seen his wife at different times with particular men. The descriptions that they gave all matched the same person who I suspected was within her work environment. My father would lie that his wife was on some official duty, but the compromising situation and places that she was found at suggested otherwise. Dad invited Eloise. You see, Eloise is the only sister of Elizabeth, and she worked as a data analyst, who we had last seen her at Grandma's funeral, but she had always called to find out how Dad was faring ever since this accident. She got to the house that day and met me alone with my dad, and she had expected to find some employees tending to my dad and all. She sat down with my dad in his room, as he did not come out often, and was touched by his situation. She stayed for about 10 minutes before asking if her older sister went to get groceries or something, because she had not seen her ever since she came, and it was a weekend. My father then told Auntie Lois that his sister was the reason he had sent for her. He started by telling her about the troubles that she's given him ever since they got married, and Elizabeth's younger sister was so disappointed, to say the least. She asked how her sister could be so inhumane to abandon her family at a time like this. According to her, even if she wanted a divorce, she could have shown some sympathy and dignity by waiting till my father had gotten a bit better and not running off with some other man. Eloise even noted that her elder sister Elizabeth had not told the family that she was getting a divorce. Aunt Eloise did some cleanup in the house before she went. She, however, promised to let the family know what's happening. She asked if it was okay if she invited her parents so they could come and see the situation firsthand. My dad gave her the go-ahead, and she brought her parents over to the house yesterday, and though they claimed to feel pity for my father, after he pleaded with them to talk their daughter out of the divorce so they would help save their marriage, they asked that he give his wife the divorce which he wanted, because no one should be forced into staying in a marriage longer than they wanted to. My father was disappointed at their reply, but Eloise was the one who surprisingly spoke up on the behalf against her parents. She told them right to their face that they were being wicked and sensitive. She called them out for wanting her sister's marriage to come to an end because things had gone bad for my father. Eloise's parents immediately shut her down by saying that she was only talking because she wasn't the one married to a, quote, invalid person. They then took their leave. My father was hurt just like I was. He had just been called invalid by his own in-laws. The actions of Alois yesterday, however, made it on both my dad and me. Update number 2. My mother Elizabeth recently came to the house with her lover. Aunt Alois had been coming around during the weekends and twice during the weekdays to help out my father and me. She was at home last weekend when her older sister Elizabeth came to the house just to bash my father for attempting to involve her family in her issues. The moment Dad and I saw the man she came with, we knew immediately it's probably her lover because the fellow matched the description and stories that we all heard. Dad asked who the man was, but she noted it was none of his business. She could not admit it was her lover because then my father could divorce her on the grounds of infidelity and she would get nothing. And as much as my father knew who the man was to her, he had no strong evidence to back up his claim in court, so he could not go that route. My father, who had been seeking an avenue to see Elizabeth face to face so he could plead with her to come back home, got angry that she had the guts to show up at his house with her lover. He told her that he was aware the man was her boss and lover and decided right then and there to give up on trying to save his marriage. Dad told Elizabeth that he would give her the divorce which she wanted, but he turned to her lover and noted that Elizabeth was responsible for his downfall. He asked him to run away before she ran him down. Elizabeth asked my dad to keep quiet and keep out of her business. Otherwise, she was going to add slandering to the list of offenses as claimed, the man my father called her lover was her boss. Well, why would her boss drive her down to the house? Alois, who had been in the kitchen and listening to the conversation, immediately walked out to challenge her sister's inhumanity. Elizabeth, upon seeing her sister, mocked her by saying that she was trying to play the, quote, wife of an invalid because she could not find herself a better man. They sinisterly noted that her sister could have my father as she was no longer interested, and even said my sister should get ready to work her butt off because she would be the burden bearer since my father would be left with little to nothing after the divorce. The embarrassment was too much. My father immediately asked Elizabeth to leave. Update number 3. I know it's been 3 years, guys. I know. And you're probably wondering how we're faring, right? Well, my dad and I are both doing great. My dad's physical condition has greatly improved, though he walks about with a cane. He financially is back on his feet, though, and this is thanks to Alois, who had borrowed him a certain amount of money to reinvest. This is not even the interesting part, though. That's why I'm back for an update. Elizabeth is back knocking on our door. Let me backtrack a bit to the divorce. My father and Elizabeth finally had their divorce, and though they split the properties evenly, my father kept the house. The judge let him keep it after considering his physical and financial challenges, and after the divorce was over, my father asked Elizabeth to come and take away her things, but we did not see her for about 90 days. She finally showed up one day looking like an expensive harlot. She said that she's been incognito because she was planning her divorce party. She said that it was a sense of pride and ego, like she expected it to be offensive to my dad or something. Well, if there was anybody who needed to celebrate the separation, it was my dad. My father asked me to go and get her stuff, but she noted she did not need it. So why the hell did she come here? It was clear she came to gloat. She noted that she had moved on with her life and said that she could likely invite my father for her engagement party to her rich boyfriend's house, which would be in the distant future. I walked her out of the house and she mocked us by saying my dad would soon sell off the house so we could feed. Things got tough for us shortly after that, honestly, and my dad considered selling the home. It was when he asked Alois to let him know if she had somebody interested in buying that she came in to us. She borrowed him some money to reinvest in stock trading and asked him to pay it back when we had it. It took about a year before my dad paid it back, but as for Elizabeth, her engagement party was never held, and it won't be. From the story that we heard, her lover, who by the way was her boss, ended things with her and got her fired. He was as stupid as my dad thought. He told her that he could not get married to a lady who could abandon her husband because things got tough. This was a sorry excuse to break up with her though, because he was just a womanizer taking Elizabeth for fun. This is how Elizabeth lost her job and her rich lover. She faded off of the scene for the next 2 years and just resurfaced this afternoon at our house. I was the only one at home, and I did not let Elizabeth in. I did not bother finding out her reason for coming to the house, and I simply told her my father's not around, but she could check back by the weekend. She wanted to act like we were cool, but I banged the door in our face. I just wonder what my father's reaction would be like when I tell him about our little visitor today. Update number 4. Well, Dad's officially married to Alois. That's right. I just let out some notable things in my last update, and I think that's because I was in a rush. Alois had been estranged from her family ever since she called out their wickedness and stood by my father and me. My father had asked her out about a year ago, and it took her a while before agreeing to date him. My father decided to take things to the next level. He asked me what I thought about him getting married to Alois. I was not against it. I know some people might think that my father getting married to the sister of his ex was not a smart move because there might be similar vices, but we did not see it that way. Besides, the fact that Alois had spoken against her family's attitude, she helped get my father back to his feet. My father proposed to her, and they would be having their court wedding in 2 weeks with me as the only witness. My father wasn't really comfortable with a white wedding because he did not want any form of attention on our family. I informed my father yesterday that Elizabeth had come to the house, and the anger from his experience with her, it just came up all of a sudden. He did not trust and waste time dealing with this matter. He got a restraining order against her right away. Elizabeth showed up 2 weeks later, and it was on a weekend. What she did not know was that we had become a family. I answered the door when she knocked, and I let her in because I knew that she would be kicked out almost immediately. She referred to me as her son and started apologizing for everything that happened, but I cut her short and told her I was not her son, biologically or legally or whatever. My father, who knew that she was around, came into the parlor, and she began pleading with him at that moment that she saw him. He, however, told her to leave before his wife saw her there. The mention of my father's wife took Elizabeth by surprise because very few people knew my dad had remarried. Elizabeth froze when her younger sister, Alois, walked out right into that room, and there she was sitting with a visible baby bump and asked her to leave. She informed her that we have obtained a restraining order against her, and she would be arrested if she violated it. Elizabeth was furious. She called Alois a thief and rushed at her, but my father quickly overpowered her and threw her out of the house. I still replay the drama in my head every now and then. Elizabeth has not gotten half of what she deserves, but hey, I guess it's a start.
I mean, this truly is the ultimate karma story. Everything that OP suffered through, every single thing that OP's father suffered through, and then the icing on the cake was when Elizabeth got a taste of her own karma when she came crawling back to OP and OP's father, begging to be taken back, only to find out that Alois, which was Elizabeth's sister, has gone ahead to get married to OP. And, well, she's pregnant. Let me know your thoughts, guys, because this story was wild, and I haven't seen someone quite like Elizabeth in a long time, and I don't really know how OP was able to handle the situation, only being 16 years old. I want to know your thoughts on this one, guys, so drop it down below in the comment section. My name's Mr. Reddit. I narrate stories every single day, so if you want to be a part of these daily videos, go ahead, click that subscribe button, and I'll see you tomorrow.